Alrighty, welcome back. This will be the last lecture for Chapter 6, so Lecture 6.8, and another fun topic, hypnosis. Although, when we come to these topics, I hope you're kind of remembering back to that, original part of this where I said, consciousness, what sense of consciousness are we connecting to? And like, for example, in the last couple, when we were talking about sleep and dreams, those really are very different ways of being conscious. And that's sort of what this one will be as well. So when we're in these altered states of consciousness, it's just sort of variants of subjective experience. So it's really getting at that concept that consciousness is about our subjective experience, what's going on in our minds. And so obviously when we sleep and dream, that changes what happens in our mind versus when we're awake and alert. And so as we go into hypnosis, there's at least a sense that something really strange is going on in people's minds in the context of hypnosis, that their consciousness is being altered. Although we're going to now play with a sort of different, we're almost going to come back to the conscious mind idea where, I've told you that the conscious mind is the place where we take our goals, things we want to accomplish, the way we want people to see us, all that kind of stuff. And we combine that with the current situation we're in, and we use that to strategize about, how to obtain our goals. The weird thing in hypnosis is it seems as though we give ourselves over to the hypnotist, meaning that we allow them to now decide what our goals are, what we want to achieve, and we do what they tell us to, not what our conscious mind. So it's almost like we're giving over our conscious mind to the hypnotist. And that looks kind of scary sometimes, And in fact, one of the first things we should do, let's just bounce it out. I always worry that we don't always start with a common understanding. So let's go to YouTube. Let's just say hypnosis, and I'm sure we'll see some stage show stuff. And let's very quickly look at something together. So first of all, here's some things that you might be interested in. I'm always a big fan of having you check out things online to get a better understanding. Here, hypnotist stuns TEDx crowd. We're not going to be able to watch all of this, but let's just watch a part and use that to kind of guide some of our thinking on this. And
on every vacation at a verbal home, there's someone like you
worried.
Who reunited the family to make up for lost time. You're together awaits.
What's on the video, but. So I'm just going to jump in. I assume this guy will have people hypnotized already.
Do you understand? So just stare at that spiral, stare at that light, sorry, right there, and I say the word S-L-E-E-P, sleep. Beautiful, very good. Excellent.
Right there, right? He just clicks and says sleep, and the person seems to go to sleep. Like he is in control now of them. Not them, but him.
Both of you just stick your hands out like this, both of you. Deep breath in, stare at the spiral, and everybody sleep all the way in. Very good. Beautiful, and you can just drop down and sleep. That's okay, very good.
So that was an interesting one. Did you see that? So they're both supposed to fall asleep, but the one on the left didn't fall asleep right away. Why? But then when he sort of did it again, she did. Let's see more.
You're so amazing, I can just say sleep and it's going to happen. Very good. Dropping down, excellent. I'm going to leave these people up here so you can experience. Are you okay for being up? Okay. So what these people are experiencing is something that we call hypnotic sleep.
Some of them
hypnotic sleep is actually, they appear to be
says.
sleeping, but I'm going to suggest to you that is not true.
Let's see if it gets a little more extreme here somewhere.
Something interesting, that their eyes are actually rolled up in their heads. Now, why would that happen? Isn't that kind of weird? And I'm going to suggest to you, let's go back to our friend, the shaman, and look at the shaman. His eyes are also rolled up. You can look at here is a little bit closer. You can see a little bit closer. And now let me show you something else, that sometimes when people are in this state, you can see his eyes are flickering. That when people are in this state, that they sometimes remain with their eyes open.
This wasn't exactly what I expected we'd get. I expected something a little more crazy, as some of these are, but I'm not going to spend a bunch of time. Comedy hypnotist. I'll spend a little bit of time here, because this is where it sometimes goes, is to more of a comedy world. And let me just get in here a bit to some spot.
The beautiful lady right over here. Your name was?
Aline Claire.
Arlene. Aline, and your name, I'm sorry?
Chip.
Just checking. Yeah, just go like this. This way we know who we're talking to. And Aline, and you were?
Larissa.
Larissa. So Larissa, Aline, and
Chip. Chip.
all right, I'm just trying to get acquainted, trying to figure out who people are. Now, let me ask you, how many fingers do you have?
10.
Just like everybody else, we all have 10 fingers, right?
Chip.
So, I don't know. It's like
10 fingers, that's all I'm trying to find out. Now,
I gotta hear a little
Louisa,
better. Is that guy
let
not
me
able
ask
to
you
talk or
this. How
something?
many
How's that
fingers do you
working?
have? 10? 10, right? Whatever. And Louisa, deep asleep now, and deep asleep. When I wake you up in just a second. Number 6 does not exist in your mind. I have completely erased number 6 from your mind. You will go over it, go on to the next logical number, and it won't even matter to you. And Chip, deep asleep now. You, on the other hand, cannot pronounce number 6 no matter how much you try. Anytime you try to pronounce number 6, only the first letter, the sound S, will come out and no more. And the more you screw it up, the more you will try to correct yourself. The more you try to correct yourself, the more you will screw it up and wide awake now. Both of you, wide awake. And you were telling me you have 10 fingers, right? She was just saying that to me. Do me a favor, put your hands out in front of you, both of them, and just count your fingers for us out loud. Let me just take the microphone so that you can see. 1,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Go on. You want to help her out after 5 comes.
Okay, we'll use that. All right. So we'll use that, and that gives you a little bit of comedy sense to go with it. Let's bring this back up here. Boom. Okay. Yeah, so for me, I mentioned this a little bit before. I saw this dude when I was young, the amazing Ravine, and he would come to arenas and he would do exactly the kind of thing that you're seeing there. In fact, the thing that always stuck in my mind is he had one poor dude on stage, and he told that dude, you came here with somebody named Irene. And when you go back to your seat, you're just going to go back to your seat perfectly fine. There is no real Irene, by the way. You're going to go back to your seat perfectly fine. But then after, I'm going to mention some word, let's say broccoli. And when I mention the word broccoli, you are going to suddenly realize that Irene is not with you, and you're going to get really jealous. You're going to think she's with somebody else, and you're going to start really looking for Irene in a sort of desperate way. This was in a hockey arena in Fredericton, and so dude went back to his chair. The show continued for a while, and at some point Ravine said broccoli, and when he said broccoli, dude lit up. Okay, he lit up. Oh, so Stella, Irene, maybe it's Stella. Okay, Stella. Let's say it was Stella that he thought he was with. I couldn't remember the name I chose. And he was running around. He was kept popping out of all the parts of the arena and going, Stella, where are you, Stella? I love you, Stella. How could you do this to me? Blah, blah, blah. And it's so everyone else finds this absolutely hilarious. And dude seems to have no clue that, you know, he is the subject of all this, that he is who we're laughing at, etc. And so you really, you know, when you see things like that, the dude that can't say 6 anymore, the woman who doesn't have a 6 in her mind, how do they do that? What is going on? Really kind of fascinating. So it certainly got me fascinating. I went out and got the Journal of Clinical Hypnosis and started reading science. I'm a geek. What can I say? Science of hypnosis. And I learned a few things. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we go today. So first of all, hypnosis is often used in entertainment. And when it is sometimes, the stage hypnotist is really trying to give the impression that people have transferred all of their conscious control to them and that they would almost do anything. You see these two dudes here with no shirt on. And so this is a common thing that hypnotists will do in a comedy situation. They'll say things like, oh, you're feeling really warm, really, really warm. You're just dying of heat. And you'll very often see the men remove their shirt relatively quickly. And you'll see women seem like they're going to remove their shirt, start to kind of, lift a shirt a little bit, start to whatever. And the hypnotist always stops them before they do. But the impression he gives is that they would have, if he hadn't stopped them, they would have, maybe even done immoral acts. And that's what we all worry about. There were movies back in the day where they used to theoretically hypnotize all these people, send them back into the world, but then they were like assassins. They could call them on the phone and say a magic word, and the person would be like, "Ugh," and they'd say, okay, now go kill whoever. And I would watch those movies and I'd be like, oh my goodness, can this happen? Right? So that notion, by the way, is called the dissociation theory of hypnosis, that somehow the person's own consciousness has been dissociated from their body, separated from their body, and replaced by the hypnotist's consciousness. And so they are now listening to the hypnotist's orders, as though he was now the one in charge. Now, would people do anything? So I mentioned here, this is a fascinating issue for showing the bounds of ethical psychological research. There's been psychological research. Let me tell you about a couple studies and have you think about them a little bit. So in one study, there was they brought in people who were afraid of snakes, and they had a aquarium, I guess, in the lab that had a snake in the aquarium, and these participants were told this was a very dangerous snake, a poisonous snake. It could easily kill people, and then obviously the people weren't real thrilled with it, but they got hypnotized, okay, and then at some point they were told, hey, you like snakes. Snakes are your friend. Go on over and pet that snake or whatever. And what they found is that some people would, in fact, do it, even though they claimed they would never do it normally because they were afraid of the snake biting them. Let me tell you an even more extreme one. There was one where there was a realistic-looking gun in the room, and hypnotized people were asked to pick up the gun, aim it at another individual, and pull the trigger. And some did. Okay, what does that prove? Well, let's take the extreme one of the gun. We'll go back to the snake. The snake one's actually not as good an example as the gun one. Do you think, for experimental credit, we could bring you into a psychology lab and have you shoot people? Potentially shoot people. I think hopefully by now you know that probably wouldn't get by the ethics committee when we tried to describe this experiment to them. You know the ethical rules of research, as did everybody in that study, which means deep down they knew the researcher could not have them harm another individual, especially shoot another individual. And so one claim of the doubters is, will this person do anything? Would they really shoot another human being? Some people say, no, I don't think so. This doesn't prove it anyway, because they know in the research situation that you couldn't ever ask them to do that they know the gun must be a dummy gun and nobody's actually going to get hurt. And so, the fact that they pull the trigger on a dummy gun does not impress me. How do you know how far a person will go against their own ethics when asking them to go against their own ethics is against research ethics, right? You can't really do a good study. So the snake one, again, the story is, okay, first of all, hypnosis does relax you. So it does make you much more comfortable. And so you might be willing to interact with a item that would normally be of fear to you. But the claim again is that the people knew this wasn't really a poisonous snake. It wasn't really going to hurt them, that wouldn't be allowed in scientific studies. So, to do a study that shows that you will push people to points of immorality is unethical. And that study can never be done. And so any participant who's being seemingly asked to do something unethical probably knows it's not for real. And so that makes people doubt some of those studies. So how, what's the alternative though, if they haven't turned their mind over to the hypnotist? The alternative is something called the sociocognitive theory of hypnosis. Fancy term. Let me give you an analogy that I think will help. a lot of young people drink alcohol. And sometimes when they drink alcohol, especially if they drink too much alcohol, they end up acting in ways unlike their usual self. But then they often, they might wake up the next day and they might think, oh my goodness, what did I do last night? When someone says, yeah, you were doing some crazy things last night, the normal reaction of the person would be, oh, well, that wasn't me. That was the alcohol, right? When you're drunk, you have something else to blame for behaviors you might emit that aren't considered appropriate. Okay, you can blame the alcohol, and a lot of people commonly do blame the alcohol. Now, it's certainly the case that alcohol disinhibits. It makes people more likely to do things that are a little unusual. So let's talk about that for a moment. As we go through our lives, and as we hang around with other people, we behave in certain ways. We react in certain ways. And at some point, they start to expect us to behave those ways and to react in that way. We almost get a little boundary box around us of the behaviors people think are normal and appropriate for us. And then it makes it very difficult to do things that are beyond that, outside of that, right? Because we're going to surprise people, we're going to confuse people, especially if those things might be offensive or might be kind of, inappropriate in some way. Like taking your shirt off in public, even for, a guy in front of a bunch of people. Yeah, there's no harm to it, but we wouldn't normally do that. And we wouldn't normally, just talk like the number 6 didn't exist, so to speak. And the claim here is that when somebody is hypnotized, they don't have alcohol to blame, but they have the hypnotist to blame. They know this is a show. They know everyone's there to see this kind of crazy stuff. And those people on the stage, by the way, it usually starts with a whole bunch of people on the stage, and the hypnotist does all these sort of things to them. Let me show you one of those things. I'll back up. I'll show you one of those things. The hypnotist is really testing how closely the people on stage will listen to and comply with what he says, what he asks them to do. And he wants to find those people who are most likely to do it. So he does things like the following. He'll say, take your hands and interleave them like this, and then clench them. Clench that really tight. And then he will say, keep doing that until I tell you to stop. Keep your hands clenched like that until I tell you to stop. So people will be sitting there with their hands clenched. Okay. And then at some point, a little while later, he will say something like, try to pull your hands apart. You will find that you cannot do it. Okay. Realize he never told you to stop clenching. So as long as you're clenching, if you clench and try to pull your hands apart, you cannot do those two things. They're stuck. It's stuck. And that's what you see on stage. People going, oh my goodness, my hands are stuck together. What's going on? Well, what's going on is you continue to listen to his idea of clenching, right? In order to release your hands, you first have to unclench. Then you can separate your hands. But if you keep clenched, you can't. So some people on the stage in that early part will do this. And the hypnotist will tap him on the shoulder and say, okay, please leave. And he kicks a bunch of people off. And he's left with those people who listen very closely to what he's saying and comply with it. Do what he says. Cool. These are what we sometimes call the highly hypnotic susceptible people. That's a fancy word, but those are the core group. And so now he asks them to do things that are silly. Pretend you don't know the number 6. And then we'll count, and everyone will laugh when you get to 6. And this other guy, pretend you can't say 6, right? Everyone will find that funny. Now, these people, why are they doing that? The sociocognitive theory of hypnosis says they have an opportunity here. They have an opportunity to get out of their box of behaviors. They can go along and do these silly things that makes everybody laugh and everybody feel good, and they're not to blame. They're not to blame for the silly things. That poor guy running around, Stella, Stella, Stella. he can play that role. He can run all around. He can do the Stella. He can create all this laughter and this wonder. And ultimately, he can say, that was the hypnotist. Yeah, I don't know what I was doing. That was really kind of weird. And the claim here is not just that they're playing along. Maybe they are playing along to some level. And remember, you saw some of those people on stage who didn't seem to be playing along, right? They weren't doing what he was suggested. So we find the people who are more likely to do it, to play along. But are they consciously playing along? Are they literally saying, okay, I'm not really hypnotized, but I'm going to pretend I am because this is fun, and I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do? Or is it something a little more subtle where they do kind of get there and they do those things, but the reason they do it is that they know they have the hypnotist to blame if they do anything weird or offensive? If somebody says, I know you can't speak Chinese, but I want you to go up in front of everyone and give a speech in Chinese. Right. And if someone does that, they're going to talk in a very stereotypical Chinese way that could be offensive to some. It'll be funny, but it could be offensive to some Chinese people. And maybe, the person wouldn't normally ever do that. But now, if people are offended, it's not their fault. It's the hypnotist's fault. So it's almost like they have license suddenly to be Jim Carrey. Do you know who Jim Carrey is? Jim Carrey, that comedian that'll just do anything. He's just completely crazy. And it's kind of like, well, this is your chance to be part of this show, to be sort of whatever, and just do what I say. And everybody will think it's really funny and whatever. And then, and the hypnotist, one of the things they usually say is, you won't remember any of this, which is almost an invitation to the person that says, yeah, blame me, right? You can say, I don't remember what I did. And that was the hypnotist. And so this is a theory, is that people in some of those shows are not being as controlled. And then in fact, if you actually ask them to do something unethical, something that went against their basic ethics, they would not do it. And what we sometimes see on stage is when people seem to be pushed a little bit, they go to sleep. And that's almost a cue to the hypnotist, I've pushed that person too far, and they usually let them go off stage at that point in time. So the hypnotist is sort of regulating this. Are these people willing to play along? Are they comfortable playing along? How far can I push them for it to be funny, but not to have them start bailing out on me, because then I lose my mojo, right? And so they have to manage that whole situation. Well, how do you know? Did the person really give over their consciousness, or is this an opportunity for them to just sort of be that wild, crazy version of themselves without any blame? It's hard to know. But those are a couple of the theories out there, and I wanted you to kind of understand it. But I also want you to distinguish this from this. So I've been talking so far about hypnosis as entertainment. And that's all fun, but we also use hypnosis in a very serious way in clinical situations. And we use it because when you hypnotize somebody, and when we say that hypnotize somebody, we usually use what's called an induction, and it's almost always progressive relaxation. So what you're doing is you're getting this person into a very relaxed state. You're saying things, you'd have them sit in a comfortable chair, and you'd say things like, okay, let's start with your feet, and let's clench your feet really, really tight, real tight, so you can feel all that tension, but then let them go, relax them, and feel the tension drain, feel the relaxation in your feet. And now let's do it to your calves, and let's do it to your thighs, and let's do it to your buttocks, and we go all the way up through the whole body. And by the end of clenching all these muscles and relaxing them, the person feels very relaxed. When we're in that deep relaxation, people are open to suggestion, and they experience very rich imagery. Ah, man, let me just get that real quick. Sorry. Pause. Where's pause? Okay, sorry. Phone call that got in the way there. But I kind of remember where I was at here. So we were just talking about hypnosis used in a clinical context, and really talking about that second point on the slide here, which is, when you put people through this hypnotic state, they feel very relaxed. They're a little more compliant. So we have this word suggestible. And suggestible means if you ask them to do something, will they just go along and do it? And, sometimes we are feeling suggestible. We're willing to do what people say. Sometimes we're just not. But when we're in this deep state of relaxation after hypnotic induction, and if we're with somebody that we trust, and usually with a clinician we would, then we're usually much more willing to go along with what they suggest. And what they typically will suggest is they will guide us through some imagery. And again, when we're relaxed, we experience much richer imagery. And that's the thing that clinical hypnotists want to leverage. It's not like if you want to come for, I want to stop smoking. It's not like the stage hypnotist. They're not going to say, every time you see a cigarette, you will forget that you want to smoke, etc. That doesn't work. You can't just suggest to somebody to stop smoking. But what will they do in the clinical case? They will use other things from psychology. We haven't talked yet too much about classical conditioning, but I'll give you a sense of it right now. What we would use is association. So let me just give you an example. We would say something like the following. Okay. You're at your home, you're at wherever you are where you normally would smoke cigarettes. And you can feel free to smoke cigarettes. But what I want you to kind of imagine is that within that room there's an ashtray. And that ashtray's been there for a while. It's got a lot of cigarette butts, it's got a lot of ash, it's got a lot of gross, yucky stuff in there. And, here's the deal. If you want to smoke a cigarette if you want to smoke a cigarette, you can smoke a cigarette. But every time you take a drag off that cigarette, you also have to lick the ashtray. And I want you to do that now. I want you to take a drag off that cigarette and taste what you taste and feel what you feel when you take a drag out of the cigarette. And then I want you to lick that ashtray, and I want you to taste the grittiness and the ugh and the and all of that. Okay, because the imagery is rich. I mean, I can just tell you that now, and you're probably like, oh, that's disgusting, Jordan. What's this licking an ashtray thing? But it's even more disgusting when you're in this rich imagery state. And what the therapist is trying to do now is connect those two, the taste and feel of a cigarette with that taste and feel of licking an ashtray. And the notion is, if you can connect those two, then some of this disgustingness will carry over to the cigarette. And that's what you're using hypnosis to do, to really create that association, to create that learning bond. And the idea is, you could do this in real time just by saying what I did to you, like with an awake subject. Imagine you're doing this, but when you do it under hypnosis, they imagine it better, and the learning is stronger. And so the therapist uses this and creates associations, and those associations can continue to have an effect long after the session. When that person reaches for a cigarette, they just have that image in mind, that ugh, and they go, no, thanks, not interested. So that's how it's used in a clinical context, and it is used quite often, and it is used quite effectively in that context. For some people, it depends sort of how suggestible you are, how much you trust the therapist, so that you'll lay back and kind of experience what they kind of walk you through. If you can really go along with that stuff and do it, then hypnosis can be very effective for you. Okay, so it's a very different beast than the stage hypnosis, and it's very valid, very usable. Whereas the stage is just for fun and silliness. Okay, hopefully that gives you a little bit more information about hypnosis than you had. It is a kind of neat state, hopefully, if we kind of now zoom back from the whole chapter, this is the last lecture in this chapter. Chapter 6 is done, so we'll be moving along to 7, 8, and 9. I will see you guys in chapter 7. See you guys.